It is at this point that most people misunderstand Schopenhauer into thinking that what he's really advocating is a life so pessimistic that the only wise thing to do is to kill yourself. In other words, this seems to make life so miserable and so worthless that wouldn't it be better if we just killed ourselves? We just committed suicide before we suffered anymore? And Schopenhauer, in principle, is not against suicide in certain conditions. In the book that I've had you read, there is actually an essay on suicide. But Schopenhauer, in general, doesn't think this is the solution. One reason is because it actually doesn't help you escape your suffering by killing yourself. Remember how we said that death is not an experience in life? So then death is not the ceasing of suffering, isn't it? When someone kills themselves to end their suffering, they're actually just guaranteeing that their life is bookmarked on both ends by suffering, because the ending of suffering in the middle of suffering just guarantees that your last experiences, your last moments of life are suffering. And so therefore, if you are committing suicide to end your suffering, you will never experience that end or ceasing of experience, because the ceasing of experience is not an experience in life itself. So then there is a wise thing to do in life, and actually that wisdom is, since we can't achieve happiness, since we cannot achieve some ultimate good, since there's no other ultimate point in life, and life itself is suffering, then the wise thing to do is to escape suffering, isn't it? To aim your life to escape suffering. Suicide won't do that. So then what is the way to do that? Schopenhauer says that actually the way to decrease suffering in yourself is to work to decrease it in others. And this makes sense from a practical standpoint. If, for example, I stub my toe, I feel a great amount of pain. You've all been there. And that pain, as long as I focus on it, is intense. But imagine you stub your toe, and then just as you stub your toe, you see a little child that's about to fall into the ocean. Your child, one whom you care about deeply. I bet you will forget that pain right away, because your focus will be so much on saving that child, your child, from suffering, that you will not be focused on yourself at all, will you? And if you don't focus on yourself, then you cannot focus on your suffering, can you? So decrease on focus on self decreases suffering. And we see this comports very well with his philosophy. The very nature of existence is suffering. And I'm only aware of myself insofar as my will is thwarted. When everything is going great, time passes quickly, doesn't it? That's why we say time flies when you're having fun. What it really means is you're so focused on the events of other things in life, you're enjoying those, that you forget yourself, don't you? And therefore, you don't experience each excruciating moment. They go by quickly because you're not conscious of yourself in those moments. And so thus, less suffering, less self, but also less self, less suffering, less me, more glee. That's the key, isn't it? So, the wise thing in life, since all that life is suffering, is to escape suffering. How am I going to do that? By focusing not on my own suffering, but look around me. There's plenty of it. All of us are suffering. And when I work to decrease it in others, by focusing on others, I lose myself. And by becoming less selfish, I become less suffering. I actually focus on other things, and what I'm not focusing on ceases to exist for me. Now, the real question is, how is that possible, right? All of us are basically selfish, Schopenhauer says. So how is it possible for me to motivate myself to live a life where I'm focused on alleviating the suffering of others and thereby alleviating the suffering of myself? Well, the key is compassion. Compassion means what? Well, compassion literally means co-suffering. Is from the word which means with in Latin, and passion is the word in Latin for suffering or pain. So when I am able as a human being to experience the suffering of others, then I seek to alleviate it, don't I? But how am I going to get that compassion? I get it through identifying. Why do I care about my family more than I care about the stranger? Because I can't identify with the stranger as much as I can identify with my son or my wife. They are closer to me. I identify with them, and so their pain is my pain. The more I am able to see that other people are just in the same lot as myself, that we're all in the same boat because we all have the same nature, we're all suffering and it's senseless, that is when I'm able to identify with these people more. And when I identify with them, I suffer with them. And when I suffer with them, I seek to alleviate that suffering in them. And thereby, through compassion, become less selfish. And through my decrease in self, decrease my own suffering. So the greatest wisdom is compassion. Compassion occurs when I realize the emptiness of existence, that existence, and therefore my own existence, that each of us are not really separate from each other. We're all like different streams within the one river, different currents commingling with each other, and our lives depend on each other. Our suffering often is the result of the ignorance or actual maliciousness of others that are close to us. When we stop trying to achieve our own ends and seek rather to alleviate the suffering of the co-prisoners in the cell of life, then we become more patient, more tolerant, more able to bear suffering, more focused on the suffering of others, and therefore less focused on our own pain. And what we cannot focus on, we cannot feel. And what we cannot feel cannot be suffering. So what we see here in Schopenhauer is a remarkable ethical turn, don't we? Schopenhauer's pessimism doesn't lead to a throwing up of your hands and saying, that's it, I don't care about you or anybody else. Rather, if you're smart, you will seek to relieve your own suffering. But you can't do it by focusing on your suffering. You can only doing it by relieving that focus and shifting it to others. When you do that, when you develop compassion, then you decrease your suffering. So therefore, the key to life is love and compassion. It's the wise thing to do. It's not done because God commanded you to do it, because Jesus said, do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. It's the wise thing to do if you want to get the only kind of enjoyment you can get out of life, and that is less suffering.